Do you ever wonder how great leaders in the community make things happen? When they encounter new, unexpected challenges like a pandemic, how do they continue to successfully make an impact? Welcome to That Sounds Terrific, the podcast that connects you with these amazing people. Get insights on what they do to meet their goals, find out how you can help them in their mission, and learn their methods so you can be more successful at what you do. Welcome to That Sounds Terrific with host Nick Koziol.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of That Sounds Terrific. I am really excited to have an author on the show, Henrik Wilenius. I think I said your name right.
Yeah.
We were struggling with names in the beginning of the story, right? But I wanted to have you on the show because of, you're an author. You're bringing some things to light that I think are really important. And I'd love to hear, all about you and all the things that you're doing. So welcome to the show, Henrik.
Okay, thank you, Nick. It's a great honor to be here. And maybe I start with how I came about to be about writing this book series.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have to go back to my childhood. When I was a kid, I loved the stories about the faraway lands and different cultures and people and languages. And there was one story in particular that grabbed my attention, and that was a story of Siddhartha Gautama, better known as Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we didn't, on the surface, we didn't have much in common. He was a prince 2005 years ago in the foothills of Himalaya. And, I didn't spend my childhood in palace or anything like that.
You were not a prince in childhood?
No, but I was actually I had my father was a philosopher, and they were both very civic minded, and I had a great childhood.
Yeah.
Otherwise, but
where did you grow up?
In Helsinki.
Okay. Awesome.
In Helsinki, Finland. Yeah, the capital of Finland. And but there was something in me that after I finished reading Hermann Hesse Siddhartha, which is it's not a story of Buddha, but it's very similar to it. I realized that I have this kind of craving to find meaning in my life. And I mean, of course, it sounds a little bit silly for a 12 years old to be thinking like that, but I kind of inherited it from my father, who later became a philosopher, that I had this quest for knowledge and understanding the human beings. And so another thing that I have, like Buddha had the same thing as Siddhartha Gautama, and he had been protected all his childhood from the sufferings of the world. And then once he got understood that there is a lot of suffering outside his palace, and he realized that he needs to get out of his birth town or birth country. And but unlike him, I didn't have to sneak into the night. I just took a plane to France. Well, 2 years later, and I ended up in the boarding school in France. But the idea was that I was living in a bubble, and I went to school that my parents have founded, and in Finland in that time was very homogeneous, and everything was very safe, and I needed more. And actually, that's what ended up happening. The first week I met a French Jewish boy who year before had been on a plane that was kidnapped to Entebbe, and then the Israeli security forces came and rescued them all.
Wow.
And killed the hijackers. But anyway, it was very traumatic for him.
Yeah,
but
I
that
can
was
imagine.
And he was traumatized, I could see. And then the following week, I was staying in Paris with my mom's friend, and she had a Tunisian boyfriend who introduced me to North African Muslim Paris. and I was really taken by how, like, they took me as they didn't think me as a kid, like 14-year-old kid, and then they really treated me well, and that's how my fascination also grew to the different cultures and languages and all that, and then well, I returned to Finland in my 20s and became an entrepreneur, art dealer at the age of 23. But after 5 years, I realized that there was more to it. That I or I started other companies too in real estate development, and I thought that I could do anything. But soon I realized that it wasn't what I was enjoying, and I wasn't finding what I was looking for. And I went back to school to study philosophy, and then I stumbled upon the Rhetorics by Aristotle, and he gives there like 7, 8, 9 points how to conduct a debate or how to win debate. But there's nothing about trying to understand your opponent. So it's all about this kind of ego battle. Who's the smarter one? Who knows better? And I realized that this is kind of that gives the framework for Western science and for Western philosophical thinking. And that's where I then turned to East, first to Sufism, which is like the mystical part of mystical Islam, and then soon to Zen Buddhism, and that's where I found this Philippe Kapleau, who used to live in Rochester, and brought the and there I found the answers what I was looking for actually, and but when I started to think about this rhetorics, which is like the fundamentals of Western science, I realized that I didn't agree at all. So then I started to write about it, an essay for my university class. But then right away I knew that this is going to be my first book, and that's what I did. And 3 years later, it was published in Finland. But of course, I understood quite soon that people didn't read philosophy that much. But what is the best way kind of to reach with your ideas, your understanding? How can you reach people and make them think? And it's stories. And then I turned into writing fiction. And this is also part of this series, this Rise Up Trilogy, which is a young adult coming of age story of three best friends at the threshold of adulthood, and how they have to deal with the real life issues like climate change, animal cruelty, racial and gender equity. And I brought all these heavy themes there, but also, of course, their personal involvement and how they try to find a place in this world. And there I put all my understanding of these different cultures and people and languages and what have you. And it's kind of my, well, I could call it my life's work.
Well, and that's kind of like what got me super interested in your writing was the fact that it's fiction, but it's in the light of truth, right? So you're talking about real life issues and bringing things to light in a story format, which, a lot of the people that I bring on the show that are strictly in business or that I connect and network with talk about the importance of storytelling. That, getting new clients or getting new followers, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish in the world has to do with like being able to get your story out there and tell it. One of my absolute favorite books growing up was My Side of the Mountain. And I may have even shared this with you when we first spoke, but it's about a boy who basically runs away from home, which is like one of those big things that, boys and think about all the time. And he goes off
Yeah,
into the wilderness and establishes a life for himself. And what I like about the book is, at the time I was very much into Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. And in the book, there were drawings and explanations of how to do traps,
yeah, yeah,
how to live off the land, what things are edible, and like how to find edible plants, and how to make a fire, all those different things. So
yeah,
woven into the fictional, because it's not a true story, it could be, but it's not a true story, is elements of truth. Of kind of almost like a how-to book, right? Of like, if you're
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
run
yeah,
away into the mountains,
yeah,
you know, this is how to do it. Um, so like that's what really drove me to, bring you on the show was when you were first talking about your series, it's those elements of truth and bringing to light really important things that are going on in our world, and the things, the people that your characters have to go through to kind of, um, maybe not rectify, but experience
yeah,
those things.
and kind of, yeah, yeah, kind
Yeah,
of finding their uh, learning how to listen to their heart,
right.
kind of, because I think learning is like lifelong process.
Yeah.
But if you have the right tools and the right attitude, that that can take you far.
So I mean, how did you decide on the characters, and how do you decide on like what elements to kind of bring into the books? Like where did that kind of come from? I mean,
Well, it first started as a story of three best friends, or and then it evolved, because I always been so fascinated by Islam. So then I thought that I wanted to set it in the different culture. Of course, that's also kind of dangerous, and this time, because it could easily be considered a cultural appropriation. And I
mm,
understand also that Muslim and people have this fear because Muslims have been so many times misrepresented in the West. But then I can say that the first I had two publishers in Cairo, or two big publishers who were very interested in the first part, but then declined in the end because they had a fear, or were fearful of the government backlash,
hmm
because, well, the freedom of speech is quite low in Egypt. But that kind of gave me this confidence that yes, that I can write about, because one of the main characters, Hashim, is Egyptian American, so there's a lot of Egyptian culture too, and of course about Islam.
hmm
But it's not only that. I think like uh, one of the great themes is that you can activism part, that you can actually, by becoming activist, and it doesn't have to be that you have to turn vegan overnight or something. You take like steps towards something that you
hmm
desire, and this is how I want to kind of empower people and young people, uh, to think about these things. Of course, I know that the Gen Z are a lot more aware of these things than any other generation before them,
hmm
and of course somebody might ask, what is this white middle-aged man writing about the Gen Z? But uh, as I said, that one thing that like would have was like life changing realization for me at the age of 12 was that it's not important how I'm different from the others, but what I have in common. So
hmm
look for commonalities, because always when people are concentrating things that divide us, it never ends well.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been doing all my life,
hmm
finding these commonalities. And when you do that, you have totally different kind of connection to other people. And
Sure.
so I've been, harvesting this understanding all my life from these different cultures. And so I can, come and write this piece. But of course, in the background, there's also that I was 15 years. I worked as a volunteer in Red Cross Youth Shelter, and my job there was to get connected. I didn't have any therapeutic role. I think you had this one lady from Rochester who had this non-profit. Yeah, she was very interesting. That's kind of what I did. That I was like the kind of adult person, but I was there to
Yeah.
give in non-therapeutic
Yeah.
help.
Compeer. Yeah. Compeer Rochester.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were there to kind of be uh yeah, a friend to support, kind of big brother, big sister kind of thing, right?
Yeah, but it also, for me, it is also that it's maybe easier because I don't have my own children, and I don't have to play adult to these
Mm-hmm.
kids. So I could always level up with them and meet them at their,
Their level.
level, and yeah, so that's how I came so familiar with what they were worried about, and
Mm-hmm.
their ideas and thought processes. And also I realized that how much we lose uh, when we move from young adulthood to adulthood, and
Yeah.
our creativity and everything gets diluted, kind of our natural
Mm-hmm.
intuition.
Yeah, I mean, like, so a lot of what happened to me, and I've referenced this on the show before, during the pandemic was sort of a return to creativity. The podcast was started. I started doing, improv comedy and being on stage again. So, like, kind of
Yeah.
reliving some of those moments and strengthening some of those things that I sort of had like got diluted or let go. But one of the things I was going to ask you is because you talked a little bit about it already, but you know, even in like in the United States right now, in the world in general, like misinformation is getting out there. You mentioned generations like have access to instant access to a lot of information, right? And
Yeah.
determining what's real and what's true and what's like, the whole fake news culture stuff is very difficult. And you talked about Egypt and you talked about how they have got, pretty strict laws in regards to, what's publishable. We're also experiencing that in the United States, the land of
Yes.
free
Yes.
speech with,
Yeah.
book bans and all those other things. So what
Yeah.
are there some, controversial things that are also like are found in your books, and like how are you kind of overcoming that?
Well, it's well, well. My also I had this. I always write first. I write film script, and I
Mhm.
really hone it, because writing script is like every word counts, and every
Sure.
word has to be active. And it was very good training to kind of tie up the loose ends and make a tight story. And I had my first the Catch You If You Fall is the book one
Hmm.
of the Rise Up Trilogy, and I was finalist in several script writing competitions, and it was picked up by a producer in Los Angeles. He's done like 15 films and won an Oscar and
Very
all
nice.
this, and then we went out and tried to find financing for it, and there were big independent production houses that were considering it, but in the end they were afraid of Islam and homosexuality thing,
Hmm.
and I understand that. And also I had many agents that read I sent my were asking my manuscript, and that was the same thing. So yes, there is. It's kind of sad and funny that that there it was Egypt, it was government backlash, and here it is some other backlash. But
Hmm.
people are afraid to touch it, and although, like I said already, I think it's justified also to be aware. That you have to be aware of this cultural appropriation, and you have to be very careful. You have to be very knowledgeable. But I have like there are maybe I don't know 15 reviews on Goodreads or or um, or Amazon by people with Arab names or Muslim names, and most of them are 5-star. And like one in Goodreads also writes, she was very skeptical in the beginning, that a white man writing this non-Muslim writing, but
Mm-hmm.
her fears turned out to be not true.
Yeah.
So
Well, thanks for sharing about that, because that can be really tough. Like, again, in this day and age with the digital imprint, like even what we're doing right here, pieces of video can be misconstrued, things of what people
yes,
say can be, you know, even altered now with AI. And that's kind of like the scariest thing about AI for me. And I'm doing research myself, like I'm doing
mm,
my EDD in higher education, and I'm looking at tools like and how they can be used, for good, right? Whereas
yeah,
every tool can be used for good, it can also be used for nefarious means too. And so like when you write subject matter where you're sort of challenging the world in a way, to hear you out that these things do exist,
yeah,
and you're coming from, you're trying to get people to like look at your perspective, and then to top it off, you have a couple of challenging topics on top of, your characters' influences too, where, the world is sort of still trying to kind of argue about whether or not climate change is real and all that stuff. So you
yeah. But what is amazing is that like the the biggest kind of societal fears that the Generation Z has are, these issues like climate
yeah.
change, animal cruelty, and racial and gender equity. But there are very little written about it.
Hmm.
People are afraid to touch it,
Yeah.
and yeah, and I noticed that in my social media. I've been suspended or blocked so many times
Hmm.
because of the content. So, but I think you just have to push on, and things will happen when the time is right. So
Hmm.
I still have a faith that I can get this out there, and people will read it. It just
Hmm.
takes time.
Yeah. So, what's next? I mean, you've got a trilogy, right? You've got
Yeah.
3 stories. Are you thinking about writing more, or are you?
Well, I'm thinking about it, but I haven't yet seen. I really need to see how this takes off
Hmm.
before I decide what I'm gonna do next. I have a, I have actually like 3, 4 manuscripts waiting in my drawer that I can always turn to, but I wanna first do my best to see what's gonna happen with this one, and then I decide what I start to do next.
Hmm. That makes sense. Makes sense. So, what is like the thing I think you're most proud of? Like, what is the thing you're most proud of about this series?
Uh, well, there was because I use a lot of readers like beta readers and um, and um, and then I had this young adult reader. She was like maybe 17, 18 year old, and she wrote to me and said that uh, this is exactly what I think,
Hmm.
what I have written. So that she could totally kind of get connected to it and found it like being true, in
Hmm.
a way that she could live through my stories.
Yeah. Well,
I
that's
think that's
awesome.
yeah,
It's kind of like, when your teacher and like your students come back after a few years and say, I really appreciate what you did for me, right? Because like
Yeah.
you don't always know at the time that you're helping
No.
the future of the
No.
world, right? But then
Yeah.
they come back and say, like, what you wrote, you know, in your situation, like what you wrote really moved me and it really helped me get through a difficult time, or it's exactly what I was thinking. And, you know, and that I guess, you know, is sort of like evidence that you're on the right path, right? So
Yeah.
that you're
Yeah.
doing the right thing. It's good to get those kinds of
Oh, definitely.
yeah.
We need that.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but so you know, what are some things that I mean, aside from obviously getting the book, which we're going to put it in the show notes, and you know, reading the books and the series, like what are some things that our audience can do maybe to help you in your adventure?
Well, of course, the best thing is to read my books, but also, of course, I want to start a conversation.
Mhm.
And I've been actually doing that quite a lot well, mostly in Instagram, because there's a lot of interest in sites about animal rights and climate change. So there I don't write about my book. I'm part of the conversation,
Mhm.
and that's I think that's what we need more.
Mhm.
And I hope that my books, and I also have I'm doing this serialist audiobook podcast. So I have done also all the books in on audiobook form, and now I'm putting like few chapters every week out there.
Mhm.
So, and I'm using a professional voice actor who's done the reading, and
Oh, nice.
yeah, and also in the end of each book I have questions for discussion. So
Mhm.
I'm trying to help people to kind of have a conversation about
No, so it's
different
almost like
topics.
a course. That's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's always it's like a invitation for people,
Yeah.
to take it further.
Yeah, so I urge my audience to you know, get in touch with Henrik, and then also obviously we'll have the links for him for his books so that you can purchase those, but also to join the discussion, to do your own research. I think this is a great public service announcement to remind the audience that you know, you have to really kind of look into all the different factors that exist, especially in books and in literature and what's going on in your environment, right? So,
Yeah,
look into animal rights and animal cruelty. Why are these things happening? What can you do to kind of alleviate some of those things? But also learn about, you know, you can learn a lot of, like we were talking about earlier, you can learn a lot about what's really going on in the world through fictional writing as well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so
But also, I would also urge parents to read it, because I think they can understand. That's why, actually,
mhm,
that's also some of the reviews I've gotten, that now that parents read that, and then now they understand
yeah.
uh, what their children are thinking, because often it's hard for parents to try to try to understand what their kids are going through, because they are in different kind of mindset,
Hmm.
and there's not this connection. But I think stories and reading or listening to podcast or audiobook, you can get into this world,
Hmm.
and it reminds me maybe your own childhood and all your things that you wanted to do when you were young,
Yeah.
and it's kind of a inner dialogue what you can have through reading or
Yeah.
listening.
You know, going back to like the book banning and things like that that are going on in the United States, you know, I guarantee that 95% of the people that are, you know, supporting these bans and saying don't read it, it's not good for you, have never read the book, you know, so they
Yeah,
don't even know what they're
no,
talking about, right?
no, but people need to get excited about something, and being judgmental and looking down on other people. That's
Right.
the best thing.
No, it's not a good thing. And honestly, you need to like read the book and then you can talk intelligently about the things that you don't like about it or do like about it or can relate to or
Yeah,
not relate to. So I
yeah,
think that we're again, it kind of goes back to some of the other stuff we were talking about earlier. Um, we're too quick to react because there's just too much information coming at us,
yeah,
and we feel like we need to react. And I've had other guests on the show and other conversations where we've talked about the need to react and the anonymity of that the internet
yeah,
seems to bring,
yeah.
where people feel more comfortable saying negative things about whatever because they feel like there's no repercussions.
Yeah, but
So,
it also they want to stay relevant,
right.
and this is being negative is like, okay, now you're so smart and
Yeah.
like what a wit.
Right.
Although actually it's not at all, but anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Henrik, is there anything I haven't asked you that you definitely want to get across to the audience today?
Yes, I think like in all change or if you read my books or you are concerned about the climate change or animal cruelty and or racial gender equity, it's like take baby steps. Don't
Mhm.
try to change it overnight. And it's a kind of a mindset that
Mhm.
once you become aware uh, of the things that should be improved, give yourself time and take baby steps, and slowly but surely you will get there.
Mhm. That's great advice. Well, Henrik, thank you for being on. That sounds terrific. I appreciate your time. I urge my audience to reach out to Henrik. We'll have contact information in the notes. But what's the best way to reach out to you?
Easiest way is my site, henrikwilenius.com.
Okay. All right.
Um,
Well, that's great. And thanks again for being a terrific guest on the show.
okay, thanks, Nick. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us in another episode of That Sounds Terrific. Don't forget to check out the show notes and our website at thatsoundsterrific.com to find the contact information and the best ways to volunteer with the organizations that we feature. If you know someone that is doing terrific things and think they should be featured in a future episode, be sure to email us their name, contact info, and short description of what they're doing at thatsoundsterrific@gmail.com. If you like our show, give us a 5-star rating and give us some social media love by liking our Facebook page, That Sounds Terrific. Follow us on Twitter at Sounds Terrific 2 and Instagram at Sounds Terrific. We love hearing your feedback on how to make our show sound even more terrific. Till next time.